Welcome to another episode of Breakaway from the Rat Race, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Neil Wahlgren. Neil started as a military pilot and embarked on a new career in entrepreneurship and real estate. Neil knows how it feels to step out of your comfort zone, and Neil is not your typical real estate investor either. Neil specializes in industrial real estate and sale-leaseback transactions. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. Neil will tell us all about it. So, Neil, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Eric.
So yeah, let's start with that. I mean, just obviously military background and process procedures. Things are kind of this. You have to do things and all of that, but you in a way your timeline in your career is defined, and then you decide to kind of like leave that behind and say, okay, now I'm going to go into something completely different, which is real estate. And on top of that, you pick something that's unusual, which is industrial real estate. So how do you do that? How do you make that transition and help our listeners kind of like understand how do you get out of your comfort zone and kind of like expand your reach?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think just to set a little background. So I was a military pilot for about 10 years. About 8 of those were full-time with the U.S. Air Force, and then transitioned over, flew part-time for a couple of years with the Navy Reserve. And kind of in that process, I found for me, it was a combination of education really helped, really starting to, before I took the jump out of being a pilot, to start educating and, kind of testing the waters to see, kind of see what the market, how the market responded. And was I, there was some anxiety and, to be honest, some fear early on. I knew one world very well. I knew how to fly a plane, and I knew how to be an aviator. And in that kind of structured military world, and the idea of what does the outside look like, whether that's flying for Delta or United, or B, even a bigger jump, what does a world not being in aviation look like? And, I think a lot had to do with, reading a lot of books, with talking to, peers of mine that had not only left the military, but had left aviation completely. And really, kind of hearing their stories and seeing, hey, you know what, like, these are smart guys. I knew they were great pilots when we flew together. And here they've come out on the other side with some completely different career that, ultimately very successful in their own right. And I think seeing those, kind of peer references was, kind of led I think that was kind of the inertia, the catalyst that I needed to make that jump myself. And ultimately I was very glad I did.
Yeah, so I think, and this is true. I think education is definitely something that's important. Obviously, I mean, when you start, you don't go and they don't throw you on a plane right away, I'm assuming. So you do a lot of training, and there's a lot of training in order to get behind a plane or helicopter and stuff like that. And so that training is there to prepare you. Same thing with real estate. Sounds like you read tons of book, and also talk to other people to figure out, like, is this the right space for me? How do I get in to that particular type of investment and all of that, right?
Yeah. No, it was actually on somewhere at autopilot, 30,000 feet over the water on a trip to Guam. And my, my navigator, who was a little older than me at the time, handed me Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He's like, hey, I just finished this thing. And, you got time to kill up there. And he's like, I think you should read this. And I actually read the first chapter, while sitting in the seat there. And it was just, I mean, all these, fresh ideas started firing off. And I got home, and probably within 48 hours had finished the book. And, really that was kind of my catalytic moment of going, oh my gosh, if I stay on this track, my well-being, my income is perpetually tied with my time in a cockpit and my time away from home.
Mm.
And, while I enjoy those things, I want the option to do them and not have to do them in order to, effectively fund the lifestyle I want. And that, reading that book and realizing how, investing in equity, whether it be in a company or real estate or, really ownership and creating that cash flow from that ownership where it works for you, whether you are or not. I mean, that was a really eye-opening moment.
Yeah. And you chose real estate. So that's obviously Rich Dad Poor Dad had something to do with that. But real estate is a pretty broad field. There's so many different ways to make money in real estate. This is partially one of the reasons why people get lost when they're trying to. They start with one strategy and then they flip to another one and they go to somewhere else, and they never really have a good strategy, solid strategy in play. They just keep going from one shiny object to the next.
Yeah.
But in your case, so how did you choose to invest and and use the industrial real estate market as your kind of like your strategy for real estate investment?
Yeah, I had the opportunity prior to Mag Capital Partners, where I work now as COO. Prior, I worked for an equity investment focused model commercial real estate firm. And what we did is we had relationships with a number of investors, and we would partner with commercial brokers or developers who had a very focused expertise on a certain asset type or a certain geography. And we would partner with them to be effectively the capital arm to bring in that investor equity to fund the projects and remain JV partners through the life of the deal. And that was kind of neat because I got to see, really about 7 or 8 very, uniquely different real estate asset types, everything from multifamily to ground up, housing developments, office, multi-tenant retail, industrial, even senior assisted living. And I got to do, a lot of comparative analysis and look under the hood on the underwriting and see the teams behind them. And, really after a lot of that, I realized, a lot of these deals are very difficult to project and then fulfill, ultimately close to what you project for your business plan. There's just so many variables that come into play. And from the side of raising capital, I found my best relationships came with investors when I could deliver very close to what I promised. And, the closer those two dynamics are, your projections and reality, the faster it is to build trust, the faster it is to really build strong relationships with your investor network. And I found single tenant net lease industrial really eliminates a huge amount of the operational risk of owning real estate. You take away almost all of the expense surprises that can come and, kind of steamroll your investment. And you're ultimately taking the responsibility of those surprises and putting them on your tenant. So your tenants, they're taking any sort of tax change liability. They're taking any insurance premium increase liability. They pay all that directly. They pay their own utilities, even building upkeep and maintenance. So, a surprise roof replacement, new paint, HVAC going out, pavement repairs. All these are things that might not be budgeted, but in the industrial model, you don't need to budget for those based on the structure of the lease. The tenant handles all those surprise expenses themselves. So from an investor standpoint and a sponsor standpoint, we have a very reliable, predictable set of cash flow that we've structured contractually with the lease that we're able to perform very close to what we say we think we can do.
So can you give us some example of what a typical industrial real estate project looks like? Is this a factory? Is this light industrial, heavy manufacturing? What are they?
Yeah. So before we jump into that, it's helpful maybe to know the different types of industrial. So you have, the subspace that we play in is referred to as manufacturing/warehouse. And that's typically, you'll see them on the highway, sometimes in the middle of nowhere, 4 walls, a giant building, could be, 500,000 square feet. Typically, they look like boxes out in the countryside. And that's effectively what they are from the outside. And the value of this real estate really is in the unique relationship between the real estate and the tenant. And they're designed around very long-term tenancy, long-term leases. And ultimately the value of that manufacturing and or storage operation that's happening there, that value of creation tied to the real estate is really what drives value to the real estate investors. And so that's going to be your primary form. Then you also have a form of industrial called flex industrial. And that's, imagine the long buildings kind of subdivided into, smaller, maybe 1,800 or 2,000 square foot spaces, truck bay doors, usually a small shipping and receiving. And that'll be a lot of smaller credit tenants, mom and pop companies that need a little extra storage, or maybe a tire shop or a, lawn and garden care storage facility, some combination of that. And the dynamics of flex industrial, frankly, are going to be more similar to a multi-tenant retail space. They're going to require, faster turnover, property management, similar to as if you own like a strip mall. And then the third main category is going to be specialty industrial. And that's going to be, everything from cold storage to, air particulate controlled, bio pharma type of spaces, making medicines, making chemicals, making, really specialty equipment that requires really a custom layout or a higher degree of safety for the manufacturing. And those are going to be very specialized, kind of uniquely tailored pieces of real estate.
Wow. And you focus on the manufacturing warehousing space. And but are you doing like value add on these projects, or are you picking a piece of land and then you build to suit, or you buy the warehouse and then what do you do? What do you do after that to add value to that property?
Yeah, no, great question. So there's a lot of different, I would say niche business models. Our particular model is we are buying fully occupied real estate, and we are effectively looking for quality real estate generating predictable cash flow that's backed by strong private credit tenants. So typically these tenants are, do over 100 million a year in revenues. However, most of them are privately held, either directly or backed by private equity groups. And ultimately, we come in, we structure typically what's called a sale-leaseback. So we typically will buy the real estate off of a private company who owns the building and operates within it. So they sell us the real estate and simultaneously turn around and sign a long-term, typically 20-year full triple net lease. And the reason they do this is quite often tied with either an acquisition or a merger, where one party is coming in, buying that company and laser focused on the operational component, less interested in owning basically, lower performing assets like real estate. So they will sell off the real estate through a sale leaseback to kind of shrink the size of that company acquisition, just so they can focus on the operational component and become a renter and keep that, balance sheet a little leaner for that acquiring company. And that's a very common practice in that space.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. So it's kind of like if you live in a house and you say, I own the house, and I'm going to say, well, let me sell you my house, and I want to be a tenant for 10 years on that house. I'll pay the upkeep, I'll pay the insurance and the utilities and all of that, but I'll pay you rent on a monthly basis. And the reason why I'm doing this is so that I can get a lump sum payment, extract the equity, so that because I know that I can, with my special skills, I can do something, invest at a higher rate than just owning the property.
100%.
So that's
and quite often they'll have corporate debt that will have maybe a 5-year term, it's coming due, and they can use a sale leaseback really as an alternative form of refinancing. So they may take some of those, they may reinvest in some capital improvements, may pay off some corporate debt that's coming due, just as a way to balance their overall financial picture.
Wow. So this is very unique. Definitely a way of this is not something that somebody can just jump in there and or can they? It's what kind of if somebody's interested in investing in this space and they don't have the understand the skill or the experience doing that, how do they start?
Yeah, I mean, there's two main ways. One is active investing, where you are effectively managing, doing all this yourself. There's a lot of barriers to entry for the model we do. Just a lot of intricacies with not only negotiating price of the building, but you're also negotiating the terms of the lease that's being signed as well. And then, understanding how to analyze the credit. So a lot of pieces there that are difficult just to jump into, but what a lot of our investor partners do is they take a passive investment position, in a syndication form, similar to investing, with a sponsor behind a, multifamily project or commercial or development. And ultimately we'll follow our lead. We are the manager on that project, for the 4 to 5 years we intend to hold the real estate, and, ultimately taking that passive investment position.
Yeah. So one good thing is that you don't have to find a tenant. The tenant is already there. So that's so it's guaranteed. You just have to, obviously you have to be very numbers driven, because like you mentioned, I mean, I have to negotiate the price, and at the same time I have to negotiate the lease, and these things need to generate a profit and a certain return. So this is critical.
You really look to line up purchase price and corresponding rent to generate yield. And what's kind of neat about it is typically when you buy an occupied asset, you are kind of battling over the price, right? And there's some nuanced pieces, but ultimately both sides want, the seller wants more proceeds, the buyer wants a lower price, right? And that really is the main, lever to pull and push on. But the sale leaseback's a little interesting because you can say, hey, I will pay more for this building, but correspondingly, I will lease it back to you at a higher price per square foot rental rate. Or, if you want to rent it at a lower rent rate, then that's fine, but I'm going to pay a lower price up front for it. So it's much more of a finesse negotiation where, really, in my opinion, I think there's a lot better alignment of interest between the seller who's staying with you, becoming your tenant, and of course the buyer who now is becoming the landlord. And so that both parties are incentivized to play a little nicer, because it's not just a one-time transaction. You're going to be together for the next, 5, 10, 20 years, even per the terms of the lease. So, really it's much more of a symbiotic relationship in that sense.
Yeah. And I think it also depends on the driver, what's driving the sale for the tenant, for the current owner.
Yeah.
Right? Do they want to have more proceeds in order for them to reinvest in some equipment or something like that? Or if it's part of a merger, I'm assuming they just want to they don't want to be in the real estate business.
Yeah.
They just want to have, get that out of their books so that they can have their operations basically at a low rental cost.
100%.
So they could be different drivers.
Yeah. One thing I like to compare to, say, like a multifamily project, right? A multifamily project, you're typically buying an underperforming asset, something that you feel is mismanaged at some level. And the sponsor team, the management team there is buying the asset. Once they take ownership, then the real work begins, right? Then they are working, they're doing improvements, repositioning it, putting new countertops, et cetera. And they think typically the business model will include some assumptions of increasing occupancy and increasing rents. Industrial is a little different. It's much more of a defensive play because from day one, you have full occupancy, 100%. And you also, per the new lease you're putting in, will have built-in rent bumps. So, as long as you don't mess anything up, this deal is fully occupied. The rents are going to go up automatically every year. The cash flow is, typically much higher than, what you might find in other market alternatives, especially from a day one asset. And really your due diligence and the risk on the deal is ensuring that it stays that way. So because of that, there's sometimes 3, 4, 5 months of due diligence, credit analysis, interviews with the C-suite, with the CFOs of these selling companies, really to understand the historical financial, picture. We want to understand how the proceeds of this sale leaseback are going to be used. Where are they going to reinvest the money that they're pulling out of the real estate? And then we want to get a very clear picture of what, the next 12 months look like, the next 5 years look like. And, we look at all that and kind of make a educated decision on, given this, how comfortable are we that they will be able to, very reliably pay their rent obligation? And, when they stay in business, when they pay their rent, that means the deal goes off. I mean, literally to the penny almost, the way you think it will be, because you've pre-negotiated and you've eliminated all the variability that we talked about before.
So what kind of what are the sizes of these types of industrial real estate deals out there? So what can, if somebody wants to come in as an active investor, can they find something that's relatively inexpensive if they don't have to do too much of a big cash layout?
Yeah, I mean, you can, if you want to be an individual investor, you can find industrial and small as 10,000 square feet, even a little smaller, standalone. Most will have triple net leases. The biggest risk you'll run into there is they're typically what we call stabilized deals, where it's you're buying the real estate with a separate independent tenant already in place. Typically, the lease terms are much smaller there, so you might have only 3 years left on the lease. So now, not only are you making a decision based on the creditworthiness of your tenant, you also have to do a lot more detailed analysis on what are the chances that they renew. What are their alternatives here? And then that becomes much more of a renewal play to say, really, the odds of us having to release this are much higher than, in our deals, it's a 20-year term. We're only holding it for 5. So the only real risk we have is a default risk, not a renewal risk. So we've removed that renewal risk piece for, some buyer who will take on the asset with, fewer years left on the lease remaining.
Yeah, that makes sense too, because when we were looking at, let's say, investing in medical field, medical office or something like that, and then, well, I don't know where the medical people, who wants to rent a space in this particular city and stuff like that, or if I want to do another big retail space or a mall, I don't know how to contact Target to go in there. I don't know how to contact Apple Store to go in there. So you need to same thing with industrial. I mean, you would need to have a partner, or you would need to have, as part of your resources, access to a group of people that would be interested in potentially leasing a space like that. So that would be something that you would either have yourself or then partner up with a realtor that is very familiar with that space. And then they can they would be able to make a determination that, if you're going to do 3 years from now, this is what you can expect. And we shouldn't have any problem finding a tenant because I know all the people that want to rent this space.
And definitely a different approach then.
Yeah, because I think this is something that's very important. I mean, when we're looking at implementing a specific investment strategy, and one of the things that we want to look at is kind of like the resources that we have, and then you have obviously time and money is the 2 big ones. But in a play like this, in an industrial play, I mean, you have to really understand the players, and then the tenants, and then potentially kind of like the other industrial space leaseors out there, so that you understand the market and all that kind of stuff. And if you don't have that yourself, then you need to have the right partner. Exactly. So that's a good way. So 10,000 square feet, and then could be in different markets and stuff like that. The other way, obviously, is to get syndication and to hook up with somebody that they already know the space, they already have a strategy, they already have a track record. So tell us about that. I mean, if I'm an investor and now I want to invest with a group they're already familiar with that and be part of a syndication, how do I differentiate, one syndicator from another? How do I know that I have a solid syndicator here, and my assets are going to be relatively safe and I'm going to have good returns?
Yeah, no, I think I think the process for finding that investment partner, that syndicator partner, typically is going to be consistent regardless of the asset class, right? And you can educate yourself on the general field. The absolute best way, the way I do it, the way I recommend my investors do it, is find other investors and just ask for referrals. Ask and say, hey, what what groups have you invested with? Have you been happy? Have they done what they said they've done? When things don't go to plan, do they communicate? I mean, those are factors as a sponsored team that, in my opinion, outweigh any specifics of the deal you're considering. That team and that team's reliability and ability to communicate both good and bad news in a timely manner. I mean, that should be your first thing that you're looking for. And then, once you find a sponsor team that you feel generally comfortable with, talk to them. They should be willing to take the time to sit down with you, answer your questions, both on a higher level basis and on a deal specific basis. And then, start small. Typically go in, what we find, I encourage our investors, regardless of their net worth, to come in at the minimums for your first deal, get comfortable, go through our process, see our documents, see our funding process. And, I say, hey, put in some cash. We do monthly distributions, hang on, get that first 1 or 2 monthly distributions in your account, get that reliability, that cadence. And suddenly, I mean, you've built up a huge amount of just mutual understanding and trust at that point. And then at that point, that sponsor team, you're investing with the team and not the deal. They should be able to produce, great opportunities beyond, maybe even better as they improve as a overall skill there. And now you feel comfortable and you can increase correspondingly as you feel comfortable and as capital allows.
And so what is the minimum investment, the typical minimum investment that you take?
Yeah, our company, most of our deals are 50,000 minimum. But, to that point we spoke on before, we actually will take a half share on the first one, down to 25. Again, we're looking to get feet wet together, ultimately build two-way trust through that process. And, so on the first one, we're flexible, and then 50K is the standard beyond.
Yeah. Because especially in this space, it's a little bit unusual. I think people are more familiar with the multifamilies. There's a lot of those out there. Even shopping malls, they know they understand a little bit better. Industrial and the sales leaseback is it's a little bit different. It's not overly complicated.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people that have never set foot in an industrial building, right?
Yeah.
In a true industrial manufacturing building. I mean, you could very easily live your entire life without ever walking in a manufacturing plant, right? And it's the fact of the matter. Whereas, multifamily and retail, you have much more direct personal exposure to those asset types. And I think that leads to maybe a feeling of greater understanding of those asset types because you see them and touch them on a more regular basis. But, once you really look under the hood of the industrial side and see, hey, our average tenant has been in place making whatever their specialty product is for, on average, probably 40 to 50 years, if not longer. I mean, we just had a tenant had been in place for 150 years. Wow. I mean, these guys literally were making parts for Thomas Edison's early experiments. I mean, it's wild, right? And you're like, okay, they're making a lot of money. They're profitable. They've clearly shown the corporate maturity to be able to evolve through, hundreds of, financial surprises and headwinds and recessions and, just every war, everything. And they've ran through that. So, really it's a great, kind of foundational piece to say, okay, we feel pretty confident that they will continue doing what they're doing. They will continue honoring their obligations to include rent. And, ultimately they tend to be what I call sleep easy type of investments because they do, they keep chugging on, they keep paying rent, and, we're able to deliver as we promise.
That's good. What's the typical return? So this, obviously I put $50,000 in, I get a return every month. You do a monthly distribution. So what's the typical return that one could expect in one of those deals?
Yeah. So during the ownership period, most of our cash flow is derived from that rent. That typically will range between about 7 and 10% per year. And that'll increase every year or two. As those rent bumps kick in, we increase the amount of cash that comes out. And so that, we'll say 8% on 50 grand is about 4,000 divided by 12. So you'd expect that fairly consistently through the life of the project, increasing a little every year. And then when we sell, typically 4 or 5 years down the road, we return that original investment capital that was tied up in the building, return that, and then all proceeds left over, we do a profit split with a one-time profit distribution on the end. All in, when you look at that plus the monthlies, we've averaged high teens returns, and so fairly competitive with other commercial real estate asset types.
Oh, this is very good. And it's a good way to, how does the industrial market feels right now? Like, is there a big demand right now for industrial space in the United States?
Yeah, if you read the articles and you look at things on a macro level, we've seen a lot of appreciation, a lot of compression in cap rates, an increase in just real estate values in that space over the last, probably 3-4 years. But when you dive in a little deeper, you start seeing, all things are not created equal, right? And what we found is primary metros, your LAs, your Dallas, Chicago, Detroit's, all these primary A-class cities, you get a disproportionate amount of investment dollars flowing in and competing for product. You have big institutional investors, you have smaller groups, you have individuals, a whole bunch, and it ends in the prices trading higher and higher price wise. Whereas what we found, we really have a specialty of kind of looking in what I call commutable secondary cities. So you might have Lincoln or Des Moines or Champaign, Illinois, cities with good fundamentals and real estate either in town or just outside of town. And when you couple that type of real estate with good industrial vacancy and price fundamentals, and when you couple that with a really strong private credit tenant, you're still able to have, in our opinion, a relatively low amount of risk coupled with outsized returns. So that's been our focus. We're very, very specific on, kind of that fringe location coupled with strong private credit. And ultimately, it's been a successful model to date.
Wow, that sounds great. So Neil, it was great speaking with you. Anything else you want to leave our listeners with? Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing, whether it's leaving aviation to a totally different field, or really just, starting to even look at a new real estate asset class, my advice is start small and don't wait, right? Take an amount that you can afford to lose, ask for referrals, find a group that at least has treated one of your friends or colleagues well, and just get started. Put a small amount in, go through the process. And I found, your education will increase exponentially quicker through the process of doing it yourself instead of just research. And, I encourage people to learn by doing, especially in this space, and do it with a partner or do it with a sponsor team. And really that's going to allow you to leverage their experience while still going through the process yourself.
Well, Neil, where can people reach you?
Yeah, you can check out some information on our website. It's www.magcp, that's for magcapitalpartners.com, or just shoot me a line. It's Neil, Neil, at magcp.com. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show, any questions you might have, or if you're interested in joining our investor group, happy to talk more.
Sounds great, Neil. Again, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for educating us on this new space for me anyway. I mean, I've seen industrial spaces before, but this is a very unique way of investing, and I really like it. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Thank you for listening to Break Away from the Rat Race with your host, Eric Martel. If you want to share your story and experience with our listeners, please message us on Facebook at Break Away from the Rat Race. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast on iTunes.